Thank you. I was just recently out the back there, and Kent and I were talking about camp cooks and cooking on ranches, and I just heard a poem about a cook. So I thought I might tell you about camp cooks that I had working for me at times in Australia in the stock camps and droving camps. I don't know what they were like over here, but I think they're pretty well the same. They're all the same breed from what I can gather. But they're right in what they say. The cook rules the camp. If you don't, you might be the boss, the head stockman or the boss drover, but around the camp, that's his area. And he makes the rules. But the trouble is he usually doesn't tell you the rules. You have to work them out yourself. Now, I had an old cook for me, working for me when I was head stockman at Springvale. His name was Nugget Newman. Kookaburra, they called him, because he used to have a bit of a laugh like a kookaburra. If anybody's heard a kookaburra, it's a funny sort of a laugh that a bird makes. And that was Kookaburra, but he didn't laugh too often. And he used to set the rules. Now, we used to have to guess, but with a bit of experience, you knew and you passed it on to each other. Unless a greenhorn came along, you never told him. Strangely enough, one of these rules were you never wear spurs around the campfire. You had to either take them off or turn them around in front of your heel. People can't understand why, but I don't know how people, when you wear spurs over there, they're usually long neck things and they drag on the dirt and then you move around, they kick up the dust. So that's one rule, it comes to sense. Another rule was you don't come into the camp without come to the food table and get food without having a wash. That was hygiene. Everybody should work that out. But Nugget had a dead set on anybody standing around his fire. He hated it. But he wouldn't tell you to move. He'd just glare at you. And in the early mornings, he'd call you in the middle of winter, and you were expected to go and light your fire over there. Well, one morning, we got a new greenhorn, or what we call a jackaroo, turned up. And of course, we didn't tell him what the rules were. This morning, he got up and he wandered up to get his breakfast, scrubbing his eyes. Didn't have a wash. That started old Nugget. And Nugget didn't say anything, and we all got our food and we moved over to our little fire and we were all squatting around our fire eating our breakfast. This guy gets his food out, a bit of steak or whatever it was he was cooking, squats himself down right beside Nugget's fire. We thought something's going to happen here. We didn't warn him. Oh, Nugget didn't say a thing. He just walked over to the food box, came back out, and he had something in his hand. Oh, this is going to be lively. He walked past that fire and he just dropped them in the fire. They were 22 shells. Well, I don't know whether anybody's dropped a shell in a fire, but it sort of goes off with a bit of a pop and throws ashes everywhere. Well, this poor fella, ashes flew all over him, and he didn't manage to get hit by any shells or anything, but he sort of fell over and he thought he was shot dead, and we all laughed at him. And one time old Nugget, the manager brought out a couple of tins of butter. And Nugget was a very proud bread cook. He loved his bread, but butter was a rarity in a camp. You didn't get much butter. So this manager brought out, for a bit of a treat, a couple of tins of butter. We used to get our butter in stock camps in tins those days, and you open it up and you got the butter. 9 times out of 10 it was all oil by the time it got to us anyway. But, this is good. So next morning, we all squatted around, cut our bread off, cooking toast on our fire. Nugget's glaring at us. Didn't say anything. So we went out on the roundup that day, and that night we came home, and I knew Nugget would have to cook more bread because we ate it all that morning. I went to the food table, and here was a big lump of charcoal on the bread, just black on the table. I looked at it and it looked like bread, but it was a bit burnt on the outside. I said, Nugget, what's wrong with this bread? You don't, he said, well, he said, you fellas reckon my bread wasn't cooked enough this morning. You thought it was raw. So now I've made sure it is cooked. I didn't have an argument. I couldn't argue against it because that was Nugget Newman. But I had a wonderful old cook working for me one time when I was head stockman on Ardmore Station back in 1968 and 69. He was an old Indigenous chap, born and bred down in the desert country in southwest Queensland. He was born in Queen Victoria's Jubilee year, which was 1887. He was still working in the stock camp at Ardmore in 1968 and 69. Well, I'm not real good at sums, but you people might be able to work out how old he was. He was christened Jubilee because that was Queen Victoria's Jubilee year. I'll never forget old Jube. In 1969, I don't know whether anybody remembers that year in 1969, but it was quite a big event because they put that fella up in the moon. And we sitting down at Chadwick camp at Chadwick on Ardmore, and we're listening to the radio, and old Jube's looking down at that radio, looking up at that moon, looking down at that radio, and he said to me, Jack, there's a white man up on that moon, is there? I said, yes, Jube, there is. And he said, 3 years before I was born, the first white man put his foot on my country, meaning his tribal land. In my lifetime, he's discovered my land and taken it over, and now he's up on that moon, taking it over. It took me 30 years to realise what he meant. And he didn't mean it nastily or anything, it was something amazing to him that what chance did they have of keeping their land if they can take this and then take that moon? And when I got to think about it, he was right. Sadly, it was rather sad with old Jube in the end. He was a very proud old man. And the company, the station that I worked on was owned by a big corporation. And the owners of it, or directors, they were most of the highest businessmen in Australia. Sir James Balderson, he was the boss of BHP Billiton. Fairfax, he owned the big media. He was at that time as big as Murdoch is today in the paper world. And then there was a big insurance company guy. Every year they'd come out and visit the station that they owned, and they'd always come to our camp. And Jube and the manager used to bring him out, the station manager, and Jube used to say to the manager, are you going to have a feed, boss? Which means, are you going to have a meal? And they always sat down on the ground with old Jube, and they ate Jube's food. It was only salt beef and bread. He wasn't a real, la carte chef or anything. He just a bush cook. Now, old Jube had started work as a horse boy, worked his way right up to be a head stockman, and then an overseer on one of the biggest sheep stations in Australia, a place called Carrandotta, back in the 1930s. And as he got older, he worked his way back to be a cook, and that's what most people did in those days. But he was a proud old man. He just wasn't just a cook in his mind, and in mine either. Well, this new manager took over. The old manager came, finished up, and the new manager came out, and he brought these directors out this day. And Jube said, you're going to have a feed, boss. And this new manager said, oh, we've got our food with us. We'll go down the creek and eat it. And I was up at the branding yard. I came down for my meal. And here's old Jube, got his bedroll rolled up. I was pretty upset. I knew what that meant. And I said, what's wrong, Jube? And he said, I've had Lord Vesti eat in my camp. I've had Sir Sidney Kidman eat in my camp. And that little flash new manager is too important to eat in my camp. So he said, it's time I gave it away. I'm leaving. The poor old man packed up and went away. Within 6 months, the poor old chap had died. I thought that was rather sad. And the manager didn't last much longer after that, because Sir James Balderson found out, for some reason, I'd known him all my life, and somebody might have slipped a word. That manager was gone by Christmas. And yes, Aljub was a great old man. He was my mentor. He helped me a lot in how to run camps and that. And he may have just been an old black cook, but in my mind, he was a marvellous man. Okay? Thanks very much.